Om Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim yat kripatamaham vande Paramananda Madhavam. Right. Bill said that he will be busy today. They are busy with family events, so he will not be able to attend.
So I just want to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Do you see
Yeah.
the screen? Okay. So just to give you a very initial overview of this chapter. So we're dealing with the chapter number 14 in the essays on the Gita, which is titled The Principle of Divine Works. So this is still one of the initial chapters in the essays on the Gita. And before going into like the deeper metaphysics and unveiling like the more Uttamam Rahasyam, the more deeper secret of the Purushottama, etc. In the Gita, this chapter touches upon the importance of doing works. As you can see, karma evapi in the Gita's verses. And the importance of not completely abandoning works for the God seeker, the way a traditional ascetic or a monastic seeker would do. So the chapter talks about the divine principle of doing works in the world. And the most important aspect that I found in the chapter was how Krishna, or the avatar on the field of Kurukshetra, gives his own example to Arjuna. He gives his own example that he doesn't need to do any works. He owns everything in the three worlds. Everything in the three worlds belongs to him and will always be his. But he still abides in doing works in the world in order for keeping the peoples together, in order for, not spreading confusion or dissent or destruction among humanity. So God himself keeps doing all these works in the world, even though he has no need for doing them. And that was the most important aspect that I found in this chapter. So I just thought I would put that up as a conversation starter in the very beginning.
Yeah, so we talked about Nishat doing the summary, which he just did of the chapter, and then having these 2 points here that again, Nishat could kind of translate for someone who may not have the same vocabulary or understand, and then kind of open it up for discussion and how these 2 points are applicable to what's going on today. Right? So, and most of the content Nishat has done, and I've tried to support with PowerPoint and helping MC, because he has a lot of the knowledge. So do you want to just read that first one, Nishat, and then
Sure,
say,
I can do
just
that.
say in your word, because we got to know each other and have nice conversations on this. And when we just spoke about it, just very nicely flowed in what this is about. So we could just start with point number 1.
Yes. So as you know, the Gita, just as a preface to it, to point number 1, the Gita places a lot of importance on tyaga, on renunciation, and not being attached to one's actions, not having any attachment to any of the gunas in nature. And it places a lot of importance on that. You have to be trigunya tita, you have to go beyond the gunas, you have to be approaching the more transcendental self and place yourself, beyond the bounds, beyond the binding of the gunas in the transcendent self. So this chapter number 14 on the essays on the Gita is an initial chapter on the importance of doing works, karma evapi, which means keep on doing works in the scheme of things for the God seeker, and not to abandon them as a sannyasin or an ascetic would. The chapter talks about the divine principle of doing works in the world and how Krishna, God himself, ever abides in doing them for the sake of the progression of humanity and holding humanity together as a cohesive whole.
And so today, that seems to be like a really important thing to do in order to help humanity maybe evolve, stay together, be in relation to everything else that's in the world right now. And I asked Nishat, well, what is a sannyasin? I don't know. And he mentioned someone who gives up everything.
Yeah,
right?
so sannyasa in Sanskrit means renunciation. Maybe Vladimir has a better word for it. Does it mean renunciation, Vladimir? Okay, so it means renunciation of, especially in light of the Gita, it means renunciation of all your attachment to the fruit of your work, attachment to the desire, attachments to, all the objects of desire, like your family or your possessions or even your feelings and your ego, etc. So a sannyasin is someone who has renounced the world, who has renounced all these attachments to his act, to the consequences of his actions, to the reward or fruit of his actions, to his, objects of possession, such as a wife or child or friends or any other objects of human desire.
There must be something said about this, because it looks like a very old, concept of sannyasa is that which kind of renounces the world. But Sri Krishna brings completely different view on sannyasa as tyaga, as we know
Right.
from Sri Aurobindo. It's not renunciation of the world at all, not of your activities, not of your relations, but of your preferences and of your claims, of your attachments, and this expectations, likings, dislikings. There the sannyasa is to take place, and where inside you have to live the same world freely, acting freely as Krishna does, and in that sense it creates this possibility for karma yoga. Only then. And this is something interesting. So free action, free activity. We very rarely experience these things, very rarely. But when we have, we can't forget them. I remember how Robert was sharing his work at Matri Mandir. That was one of those moments where there is freedom. Freedom because it is filled with some other presence. An activity doesn't matter what, even very hard and very physically impossible to imagine that you can have a pleasure out of it, any kind of pleasure. But it was a fulfilling activity, more than pleasure. It was kind of bliss. Even all those pains are turned into bliss because there is a presence within the activity. And this is something we have to try to experience in our life more and more, and then we will see that it works. Sorry to clarify sannyasa, because it may be understood, usually it is understood as a renunciation of the world, not at all in Krishna's view. In Krishna's view, it's totally different renunciation of attachment of our own expectations and desires and ego sense to claim of the result, We have to renounce that. We are not doing it for our satisfaction. Then only true satisfaction comes. This is something interesting. When we renounce a claim for satisfaction, the true satisfaction from activity comes. Okay, I stop here, sorry.
That sounds beautiful. That sounds like the kind of freedom that we need to have and want to have, right? And I think it's probably, people probably do misunderstand it a lot and think that to give up everything is, that might be just, that might feel great for that one person, but it's not necessarily helpful to people he or she's in relation with, right? The freedom you talk about is the freedom that don't we all, we want that.
By the way, a very similar concept we find in the Upanishads, and most probably it's a well-known passage many of you know. I just quote here for the sake of explanation how Yajnavalkya explains this idea to his wife before going into Vanaprastha ashrama. He has two wives, Katyayani and Maitreyi. And so Katyayani asks him, can you leave me whatever your possessions are, physical possessions, that means house, land, and so on. And Maitreyi asks for his spiritual inheritance. She asks him, give me the knowledge which you acquired by living with us. So she wants to inherit his knowledge, and he tells her this passage which is so luminous, and it sounds something like this. It's not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear, but for the sake of Atman, the self, the being, the husband is dear. It's not for the sake of the wife that the wife is dear, but for the sake of Atman that the wife is dear. It's not for the sake of, and he continues the whole list, for the gods that the gods are dear. It's for the sake of the Atman the gods are dear. It's not for the sake of everything, sarvam, the world, that the whole is dear, but for the sake of the Atman, that the whole is dear. And this is something profound. Yes? If we keep this in mind, all minutest activities would make totally different sense.
So do we want to go on to the next point and have this conversation again and then open it up and see if people would like to discuss more? You want to do it like that, Nishat, or some different way?
Yeah, sure. I could do that. Yeah, but there's a lot of material in this chapter, so there's no danger of running out of material.
Right.
So I'll just read out the second point in here, and maybe we can have a discussion about it. Immediately, Krishna gives a formula, saying, in the self, then in me, is the formula he gives, implying that the transcendence of the individual personality, by seeing it as becoming in the impersonal, self-existent being, is simply a means of arriving at that great secret impersonal personality, which is thus silent, calm, and uplifted above nature in the impersonal being, but is also present and active in nature in all these millions of becomings.
So then do you want to translate that into other, keep further refining?
Sure. So at this point, Krishna doesn't yet talk about the Purushottama. He doesn't entirely reveal the identity of the Purushottama yet. He is still talking about, himself as Krishna, as the God in man, or the divine self. And he says that the formula he gives to Arjuna is place your being above the gunas in the self, in me. And that by doing that, he would be, he would be transcending the limitations of the gunas. He would be transcending, his attachment and his dualities, especially like between grief and happiness, or sin and fear, or fear and hope, etc. And this is a putting this being above, transcendent reality in the self above, is a means of arriving at that ultimate concept of the Purushottama. It is a means of arriving at that really transcendent concept where all being and becoming is ultimately unified and reconciled. So by first trying to find the Akshara Purusha, the Purusha which is in the static, immobile being, it gives you a way to ultimately reach even more beyond and go to the Purushottama, or the ultimate Purusha, which is beyond all dualities, beyond all oppositions, and which is both impersonal as well as personal. It is beyond both personality and impersonality. And it is beyond both inaction and action. So I think that's what this second statement or conversation starter is talking about.
And I think, Nishat, this is where, the way that you describe that, this is where your definition, as you gave it about a sannyasin, would certainly come in, because what will happen is, he says, in the self, so you don't stop, as you say, you don't stop in the transcendent, above the three gunas, right? Like a sannyasa would, they would typically go and rest in nirvana or the transcendent. But what he says is, you say, comma, then in me. So it becomes a stepping stone. Right. And in that way, I think we can bring back in your definition of sannyasin in terms of those that don't take it as a stepping stone, but stays and rests in that position.
Right, exactly. You put it much better than I could.
Oh, you put it perfect. Perfect.
So yes,
very
go ahead.
good. Very good. This kind of discussion. There is slight element in it, which is absolutely true, that we have when sannyasa, when that kind of renunciation is achieved and nirvana is realized, people are searching for nirvana as the final end. The difference between Sri Aurobindo's yoga, integral yoga, and any other Advaitic yoga, where both are seeking that realization of unborn self, of separation of Purusha from Prakriti, both, but by different means. And this is the only difference. How do they? So in the Advaitic yoga, there will be, all the bridges will be burned. The nature will be destroyed in order to arrive at that transcendental shunya, or that spirit which is, everything is not this, neti, neti, everything is denied until the only truth of the spirit remains. In the integral yoga, it's not the way. And that's what he explains in the letters mainly, where these questions, people put these questions forward. The difference is that when we arrive at this nirvana, we should remember that this world is a part of that manifestation. And then we deal with it differently. We put on hold certain things, but we do not destroy them. We do not burn the bridges. We kind of withdraw from them for a while because it's needed. The same as Advaitic sannyasa. Do I make myself clearer. Yes, there are different attitudes towards how to achieve that nirvanic state, or that realization of the spirit, unborn self. So in the integral yoga, it will be very careful with elements. For example, Sri Aurobindo was asked by Pavitra, what should we do with reading? Or any sannyasin of that kind who wants to go to nirvana would not care even about this question. Yeah? Is reading dangerous or obstructing our path towards realization of unborn self? He says, no, it's not obstructing, but you have to withdraw a little bit. You should not be very actively engaged in it, because you need that silence or that space. You need a certain, stepping back for a while, but not totally burned, not totally demolished, coming back. The whole idea that you should not come back in Advaita, should dissolve yourself in the spirit and never come back to be born again, is a wrong idea. It destroys the manifestation. Wrong in a sense that the means to reach the spirit are destructive for the manifestation. So the person who burns the bridges cannot come back to it. And Sri Aurobindo points out the discussion with one very ancient yogi who lived several hundred years in Himalayas, where he spoke with him, and he told him about this ideal of transformation of nature by the spirit. And he told him, this is such a beautiful idea, but I cannot do it anymore, because when I reached that realization, I treated this world and all the means as if the enemy. So he burned the bridges. He cannot come back to the world. He has no means to come back to the world. He needs to reboot the system now. This is something we have to think of. It's a very subtle matter, but it is essential here. And though they are the same realizations of Brahman, but they are achieved by different methodology and for different purpose.
And I would just add, Vladimir, too, because this reminds me, I may have even shared this with you maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but I have a dear friend who was deeply into meditation his whole life. He not only meditated day and night, but he taught meditation. And it got to the point where I don't know if he reached totally that transcendental realm, but he reached a point where as he tried to engage in the world every day, as he would describe it, everything was dry. Everything was emotionless. He had absolutely no feeling or connection with anybody or anything. And at this point, he was about 60 or 65, and he desperately wanted to reconnect with the world, but he didn't know how at this point, at this late stage, after so many years. So definitely it's a real thing. Anybody who doesn't keep that bridge or keep that connection 1 foot here, it's a big risk if you're going to live in this world.
Yeah, very good example. And we feel that this Advaitic, we are so impressed by this Advaitic approach. Many of us, I myself was very much Advaitic, though I followed Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga all my life. But still this Advaitic kind of vision or bug is creeping in every time and tells us that spirit and matter are two different things. And if you have to go to the spirit, you have to, to renounce the matter. You have to neglect the matter. You have to close our eyes on the matter, on the manifestation, if you want to dive deep inside. Is it not so? Yeah, we close our eyes. Yeah, Martha, yes.
Yes, it just seems so characteristic of our dualistic thinking, sort of either or, black and white, that it's very hard for us to, the mind sees things in pieces, doesn't it? So it's very hard for us to have an integral view and to really, if we can see the divinity in everything, then that's solved for us. But we have to get to that point. And it's very attractive because of virago, the general disgust that we can feel with life in the world. There's so much that we might prefer to turn our backs on rather than confront and deal with and work through. So the transcending and just leaving the world behind is a very alluring prospect. It's very convenient, isn't it, in a way?
Attractive proposition. Absolutely. So something in us wants to get rid of all those troubles and all those, unnecessary kind of obstacles and so on. Something in us is always Advaitic in a way, spiritual. And so to become totally integral, it's not an easy topic, by the way. It sounds very easy, but one has to be holistic. And to become holistic, it requires some development and time. And if we have to accept also the scientific paradigm, that's why we are speaking about this, the physics and the vision of the quantum mechanics. We see that the space is infinite, not only in the vast sense, but in minute sense is also infinite, which we cannot imagine. So we can go down into the minuteness of the spirit infinitely, into the space. Space is infinite in the minute diminishing. So if you think about that, I can think about bigger and bigger from some kind of foundation, and that creates the duality. But if I think that space is in both directions infinite, then what is this in the middle? What was the manifestation which we have to hold on to? Why it is here? Then it is clear why Krishna is constantly working on it, though he has nothing to achieve, because it is the formation within the space of all those energies to manifest the infinity in time and space, to spell out all the details of this infinite being. Yes, please go ahead, Kimberly.
Well, and I also think if you look at it through that lens, you're looking at it as everything is whole, right? Everything is in constant flow and whole. And this fragmented view we have is really an illusion. And it's going back to our true nature of reality, where things are whole and easier. But I have a question related to that point number 2. I was thinking of it in terms of, when people are very involved in their action and their work and feel very satisfied doing that work, but are not doing things to develop their interior life, for themselves. So it kind of goes back the same ways, because not everyone is in the world is focused on this interior development, right? And meditation and reaching these states. I think a lot more people are thrown into their work and not even thinking about this stuff sometimes. So it would be nice that people who are working in this way would take some time for themselves, which then helps the collective in terms of, development and that freedom, because everyone deserves that freedom. So that's what I was kind of backing into it the other way, from a practical standpoint.
By the way, from your point of view, from this integral point of view, people who found themselves in work, in manifestation, are actually doing the best they can do.
Mm-hmm.
They are already connected. They already fulfill the purpose, because this manifestation is not a small thing. It's not something secondary. It is the first, it's the primary, it's the purpose. That's why we are here. We are working, we are living for it. Yes. So it's just other way around, as it were. They are maybe not aware, but they are well connected, and they fulfill their purpose of this manifestation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, so I'll just pitch in and bring these two together, because as Kimberly was saying that, That's true. You know, we all need a break, if you will, in order to go inwards and connect inwards, and develop kind of this inner connection and sense of being. But then it's not again to rest there in comfort and quiet and feeling whole, but to now turn around and keeping that connection, right? That's also part of karma yoga, keeping that connection and now engaging in the world, engaging in work. And that work then becomes transformative. It's not just, I have a job to do today. So I think it's really both of these are needed. And if you do pour, you know, believe me, I've poured myself into work for many years and there isn't any time to do that interconnection. And it does take either some sort of crises or some severe misalignment. But once that happens, you get it. You get this need for having to go inwards and establish that connection before going back out into the world and into work. But if you can make that connection and keep that connection, which is nearly impossible, that to me is the trick of a large part of karma yoga.
I think also it helps a great deal if you can offer your work to some higher being. In this case, it would be Krishna, of course. If Arjuna can offer his work to Krishna in that way, sacrificing his own, Arjuna's ego, then he makes a lot of progress. And I think it was the same for so many people in the ashram. And Pondicherry, it was a relationship they had with the mother and Sri Aurobindo. They before they started their work, for example, in the bakery or the laundry or whatever, it would start with the process of just offering silently that work they're going to do to the mother or Sri Aurobindo. And gradually, at the end of the work, they might do it then as well. And gradually, because of the presence of that force there and that atmosphere, that began to grow. And that is how the ego is gradually dissolved, and you become more and more an instrument of something higher than yourself. And I find that helps me a lot. For many years, I've been a bookbinder, so I've been working with my hands. And that's what I try to do. I try to consciously do my work, offering as an offering, and things seem to go well. That's all I can say. I mean, of course, there are problems. And sometimes there are many things that I can't do that I need to work on and solve and so on, because the work I get some of it's very difficult. I'm working with old books that have to be restored and so on. So it's a lot of different materials involved and a lot of different processes. But I do feel that in that way you can get help. I mean, help in you seem to get the answers, should I say, and you get a deeper fulfillment. So I think this idea, and I'm wondering when, in the Gita, when this bhakti comes through, because I think it's so important for Arjuna's development and for anybody's development.
Yeah, this is the beautiful thing, offering as a major Vedic sacrifice. They constantly speak about offering. Offering is everything is offering, yes?
Could you just speak up a little bit more, Vladimir? I don't know if it's my side, but I'm just having difficulty hearing everybody for some reason. And I can't get to my volume. Pardon?
Should we stop sharing the screen right now too, so we could see each other better?
Whatever you two want. Mm-hmm.
Sure, I can stop sharing.
Oh, you have some other slides, yeah? Oh, this is the only one.
Yeah,
well,
I think
couplets. There are some couplets identified if we wanted to go deeper into some of the couplets later. But we could share the screen again if you want to go back to that.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
But we didn't want to interrupt you, Vladimir, what you were saying just now.
Yeah, about the offering, it's the major idea of the Veda, because when we offer our activities, our energies, vital, physical, mental energies to the spirit, something happens. to spiritual powers. They become present and they change the quality. So through the activity we can arrive at deeper fulfillment, let us say, or plenitude. We are looking for fulfillment. We are not looking even for knowledge. We want to fulfill the spirit in nature, yes? And one way or another, knowledge is another fulfillment. Bhakti is another type of fulfillment, and realization in physical form, building something meaningful like Matrimandir or binding the book, is another fulfillment. Yeah, and all of these are fulfillments which we are aspiring for. So they are not different. In a way, we made the difference between the physical and spiritual, but they are going together. And this is so difficult to realize, that this is one and the same world that the divine wants to manifest in all the details, all the varieties, minutest elements of in time and space. It looks like very insignificant event. I did so little today, but that little, if it would be consciously offered, that would be the most meaningful day. Much more meaningful than big, grand achievement without that offering, without that connection. So offering is the key, definitely. And that is connecting what Radha was saying, the inner and outer. That is the bridge. Yeah, I stop here.
Okay, I still have a question, but I guess even before, especially as it pertains to my life, I think the first thing I should do is really seek after the Brahman, right? I should really go and seek after Brahman and also Parabrahman before I even think about, acting in the world or doing any actions, etc. Am I correct in that, in making that kind of a value judgment?
There are as many ways as there are people. If you feel that that is your way to find the impersonal spirit beyond, to separate Purusha from Prakriti, yes. Maybe for some other people it is not their way. Yes, they find it through psychic opening, or through offering, or through karma yoga, others through bhakti yoga, others through jnana yoga, looking for philosophical answers which are leading them higher and higher, and then finally they are ready to receive the presence of the Spirit. There are as many ways, and of course if Sri Aurobindo would be with us today, or the mother, they would tell you what your way would be the most effective for you. When Sri Aurobindo was accepting Pavitra, if you remember, he looked at him and he said, you see, in you there is something in you which aspires for the higher truth. And this aspiration is answered from above. So he saw it. So he gave him the way. Yes, that was his way, to receive the force from above. And Pavitra was very disappointed that he didn't receive that separation of Purusha from Prakriti immediately. He was even mentioning this later, saying, when would I have that mukti where I would see myself as objectively as I see others? He says, this force already descended, so it's not important now anymore. Now the whole path has changed. He wanted to realize what you are talking about, Parabrahman, something beyond, and then he was put into a totally different situation where he had to stay here and to dedicate himself totally to the mother and to receive her grace in every activity, in every thought, feeling. And so his life has changed. So we do not know the path, what is right. Everything is right if you feel it is right for you. I think, at least. I can't recommend anything. For me, it was more jnana yoga, more of that. I was looking for the meaning, for the truth. It was having so much meaning for me to know the truth. For others, that knowing the truth may be not much of meaning, you know.
I think that's the beauty of this yoga. There are so many ways to the divine, and Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have laid those out for us, depending on our individual characteristics and temperament and so on. I mean, everybody's got his own way, and the ways are open, and with their guidance or with guidance, that way will be found, whether it's through knowledge or work or devotion or whatever. And I think that's the beauty of this, the wideness and the magnificence of this yoga.
One thing for sure we need is guidance. We need their presence, and that is 100%. Without it, not much can be done. We can beat around the bush, build up our own philosophies, write our own essays, publish millions of books. It won't do. We need the spirit, the spiritual presence, and that is the guidance, the Divine Mother in us.
So Vladimir, how do we know that we have their guidance, right? Because we don't have them in physical form, right?
May I say something here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think in the integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo makes it quite clear, maybe that's my understanding, that first we have to get in touch with our psychic. Once we are on that path towards the search, it is the psychic which aspires. It's a spiritual exercise, for want of a better word, aspiration. And it is when we get closer to the psychic, in fact, in Savitri, and I always fall back to Savitri, in Savitri, it's the whole search for that inner being, the true inner being. And Sri Aurobindo says that it's only when the psyche puts off her veil and steps out in the front that our life really begins on the spiritual path. And it is then that we can, involve ourselves in all these different paths, yoga of love, yoga of works, yoga of knowledge, because the way opens and the clarity comes. And it is, like we were just discussing, there are so many ways and so many paths. How are we to know which is the path meant for me? So the swabhava, the inherent innate nature, steps forth, and you work with your actual true inner nature. And the spirit in which you do the work then, it doesn't matter what work we are doing. There's no high and low work. No matter what work we are engaged in, the spirit in which we do the work, that has to come through as a complete offering and a great love for the work. And these are qualities of the psychic. It cannot come, I think, without thinking with the mind or making an effort, personal effort. I don't know. Just thought I'd put that out there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yes, Sri Aurobindo, in his yoga, he drifted more and more towards psychic. Yeah, we could see it in time when Mother arrived. Especially from that time on, he made that preference for the psychic awakening, and then psychic transformation first, then spiritual, then supramental. So there is the whole procedure. There is the whole science or technology of integral yoga, yeah, where psychic is to awaken first. You're absolutely right. And And sometimes the psychic is awakening not first, and not as, for example, in Sri Aurobindo's case, or it wasn't the psychic which awakened first, or in Pavitra's sense. If you read Conversations with Pavitra, you will see that the force which came down to his calling of his psychic, of which he was not aware, later he became aware that it was the psychic calling to that descent which came to him, opened up the psychic being within him. So in a way, one way or another, the psychic has to be open and come to the front. To answer this question to Nishat, how do we know that it is the spirit? You may be misled by some misleading dawns. Your mind can create some, luminous reflection of the knowledge or truth in your mind, and you would feel that this is, yes, that makes sense. Makes sense is not really the thing. Everything which makes sense, not necessarily the truth. But there is something which follows it always, and that is a sense of joy, or fulfillment, or peace, or light. You would have some kind of effect from this way of thinking. You will have the realization of certain kind which will tell you that you are on the right path. For me, it is always a kind of bliss or joy. If I arrive at blissful state of my thinking, that thinking leads me to that blissful state, then I know this is the right way to go. It has to bring some joy. But maybe for some other people it is something else, peace or depth or light. For me it is more like an happiness of some kind, or fulfillment. You feel that makes totally, your life makes sense now and fulfilled for this moment, and you would like to keep it, but you can't keep it. You have to proceed. You have to discover again, rediscover truth again reconnect to that bliss, and again and again and again, until it becomes more constant. Yes, Charles, you want to say something, I guess.
Well, Teresa asked me what it was for me, and I was just reflecting to her that I don't believe it's bliss. And then prior to that, we were talking about where I get stumble and some of this is that I am within myself, I'm certainty that self is singular. And then the listening I have in this conversation and others like it, it's like we're talking about different selves, but I really think we're talking about self in different aspects or different stages of evolution or consciousness, but it's still self is singular. That is correct, isn't it?
About that statement, first in self and then in me, yes? Here there could be interpretations, yes.
Yeah, please. I'd love to hear that at some time, because I don't know how to think of it other than self is singular. I don't have a higher self and a lower self and a psychic self and a.
You have all the set of selves, starting from supramental to the physical, and your physical self is your body, physical body, and then you have vital body, which is your vital self. You have mental self, which is quite well formed, which is very distinguishable from other selves, from other mental selves. And you have something beyond supramental self and even transcendental self. Yes, you have the whole set of selves, like Matryoshka, this kind of doll, Russian doll within the doll.
But that's where it gets confusing. But for me, is because I used to ask myself,
and it is oneself, yes.
It is oneself, right? Okay, if we can go with it, it's oneself. Then I can play with the doll thing. I don't have a problem with that. But it's still oneself.
Yeah,
all the
it's like in manifestation. You see, from quarks, from the you come to the atoms, atoms to moleculars. So you have like one in one in
I,
one in one in one. Yeah, but the
that
self.
level of differentiation. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
But I would have to say that even though there's one self, we can't ignore all the cells, all the individual cells, right? Because this is where the transformation happens on the physical self, on the vital self, on the emotional self. It happens with the psychic being as it evolves through lifetime. So each self has to be recognized, and each self has to go through some transformation, except for that unborn self, that self beyond time and space. So we can find comfort in that all is one, but the work has to, in my mind, the work has to be done by acknowledging each of these different Purushas and the consciousness that goes with each of those different Purushas. So there's a different physical consciousness that's very different than mental, right? And very different than your emotional, and very different than the psychic. And each of them needs some level of evolution or transformation. And if that's not done, then it's just sort of like you're resting with the one and not doing the work here in manifestation. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see it.
Isn't it like it's just one self has taken the ride through all of those different stages? It's one self. I'm not my body, so I can't say that I'm a physical self, right? I'm not my soul. I can't say that I'm a soul self, right? Am I off track here? Help me, somebody. help me.
If I need somebody, help, not just anybody.
I need help.
Yeah, this the Indian philosophy has a very beautiful solution for it. Yeah, and you just call it Purusha or Atman. So there is Anandamaya Atman, so or Purusha. There is Anandamaya Purusha. Purusha made of the bliss, transcendental. There is Purusha Vijnanamaya Atma, made Purusha or self made of Vijnana, supermind. Purusha made of mind, Purusha made of vital, Purusha made of physical. And still it is one Purusha. This is kind of difficult to grasp. One Purusha on each level of manifestation builds another representation or another activity within the field. So this field has fields within, so to say. And on each level, this one Purusha is translated or formed in a different way. That's why we speak about the physical body as if it is some other body than vital. And it is, because in the vital field, this Purusha, very interestingly, in the same form of Purusha, in the same form, head, eyes, seeing, speaking, the faculties are coming in. These faculties which are pervading and holding Purusha. Purusha is the faculties, actually, of consciousness, which is holding these levels upon levels. They are all kind of pervaded by these faculties, held within. So on the physical level, you have eyeballs and brain and nervous system and so on. But beyond that physicality, there is some vitality which supports the action of the eye, supports the action of the nervous system. And beyond that, there is a mental structure of Purusha who has the vision, mental vision, mental hearing, and so on. And beyond that, there is a supramental one who wants to express himself, who wants to see himself, and so on. So Purusha is one, but on each level, and that is the beauty of this manifestation, that we can't arrive and say that material is different totally from the spiritual. They are all result of the spiritual action, or the world is the manifestation, or we say enterprise of the spirit. So the spirit manifests itself in this form. So this physical form is nothing but spiritual form. And this is kind of It's a new dimension for us to think. We don't think in this case it is one, definitely. The oneness is very difficult to achieve. It's not the oneness beyond, or oneness here on the material level. It's the holistic oneness of all the levels. And yeah, it has to be most probably realized through experience. Yeah, and still we have to deal with each one of them, as Rand has said, separately and attentively. They require different treatment, different movement, different understanding. We have to learn. It's a huge science. Yes, how to live in the vital body, in the mental body, how to live in the physical body. We have to train all of these bodies, create in them awareness of Purusha, of these faculties. They have to become self-aware. As you beautifully said in your title for your presentation, that this universe is perceiving itself, and by that universe is evolving and developing. So the universe is looking at itself, and by that it evolves. So there is inbuilt consciousness in the universe, which creates this phenomenon.
So what where I was tracking with you, and I found in myself understanding through my own constructed reality, is when you speak of those things as bodies. But I can that's easy for me to grasp that they're bodies. But there's a single self within those bodies.
Absolutely.
In my truth, right?
Yeah, it's also in the Indian philosophy. Purusha is throughout, from Sat Purusha, from the infinite being, to the Annamaya Purusha, physical being. And quite interestingly, the word Atman in the Veda is used in the same way. Atman is physical body, and Atman is any other self. And this is something, there is no difference made between these two. It's later with Advaitic thinking, with the split on matter and spirit, that distinction was made, and Atman became only the spiritual body, whereas the physical, it's no more. It's no more Atman. But in the Veda, Atman is mainly physical body, the self, and it is the word which means self, oneself, myself, yourself. What is the self? It's a perfect word, actually. In English has this word. In Russian, we do not have this word. We are struggling how to call that self. We do not have this concept. We have to say I. I is not self. Self is better. It is reflecting upon itself. It knows itself. It belongs to itself. It has itself. It is self. Something which is. I mean, linguistically, it's a very interesting concept, self. Yes? Not the spirit, but the self. And notice that Sri Aurobindo speaks always about self and spirit and self. Why these two? That's quite amazing. You will just trace it to Life Divine, self and spirit. How many times he says self and spirit. Why and spirit? Why not just self or spirit? It's enough, no? No, it's not. It is needed, because there is a self-awareness. Spirit is like existence, consciousness, bliss. And self is like existent, conscious, blissful. And this is the difference. These are subtle matters, very interesting to discuss. Sorry to drag you into the Indian philosophy in this case. All right. Please go ahead. Okay, let us finish with your presentation. Sorry, again, I got carried away.
So, this chapter 14 had about 7 couplets that were like really standing out from the Gita. So I just thought they were like really interesting because they pertain to this: keep doing your actions in the world, just like the Upanishad talks about, like live your 100 years, but do your works in the world. That is the way that is held out to you for immortality. In the same way, the Gita talks about doing works as well in this chapter. I can just read out these if you want, or does Kimberly want to read them out?
That's okay.
Oh.
Do we have time to do that? I don't know if we noticed the time that it is already 7, but I could read some of them if you'd like. It's up to you.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is a whole page here that's full. I would suggest, if Nishat, you and Kimberly don't mind, that we carry this over to next time where we can really dive in and have some discussion around these. Otherwise, I'm just a little afraid that we're going to rush through them.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
your call, Nishat and Kimberly.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, these are powerful statements here of the what is loka samgraha. We have to see what it means, and to hold together the peoples, to work for the whole world, and these are profound.
Maybe you could send this to us, Nishat, or send it to me, and I can
Sure.
post it to Mighty Networks, and then we have it to contemplate and meditate and consider for next time.
Yeah, I can send it to you, Radhe.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that right away.
Great. Siegfried didn't say anything. We wanted to hear your views, Siegfried. Maybe to the kind of to put on the top of the cake some cherry. No? It's too late for you already. Yes, for
He may not be there. He may have stepped away.
Yeah, it's like 12 o'clock or something, or 1 o'clock. All right. So, shall we stop here then for today?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful, Nishat and Kimberly.
Yeah,
and,
thank you both so much.
And everyone who was participating, sharing thoughts, ideas, and we were hoping for this kind of, coming together and sharing whatever knowledge we have, and build up these blocks of our yogic path that will help us to understand better what we are doing here in this world, why we are manifested in these bodies, what is the purpose of all this strange life,
Right.
beautiful and strange.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll send the presentation to Radhe and to Vladimir.
Great.
And Kimberly has them too. And if anyone else needs them, I can send them to you as well.
They're in PowerPoint and PDF. Do you have a preference?
Doesn't matter. Any is good.
Okay. Okay, I'll send them over to them, Kimberly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, let's maybe close with mantra. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santo Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Hari Om. See you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Nishat
you.
and Kimberly again.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.